We are live. There it is. All right, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Happy Thursday, or I should say Friday Eve from us here in the Weather Center to you all tuning in this morning. Apologies for that random delay. I'm not too sure why OBS was not connecting with YouTube. It took forever and a day for this thing to finally say I was ready to get going. But ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for taking some time out of your Thursday morning to join me here on the Weather Center. It is 9 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, August 8th, 2024. Just as we had alluded to yesterday evening, if you tuned in for the live stream, first and foremost, I said, only reason we would break live for the day today is if there was stuff to talk about. And to caveat that, if you look at the National Hurricane Center homepage, we do officially have our AOI, and it is already steadily increasing as well. So from the jump start, if you wouldn't mind clicking that subscribe button, making sure your notifications are turned on, click the like button or nudge the like button so we can get this information out to everybody, please, because this is going to be an imminent threat, and confidence is unusually high, I will say. Not unusual for the time of year, this is as expected, but unusual in comparison to the systems we've tracked up to this point this hurricane season. So if you wouldn't mind nudging that like button, let's go ahead and get started. Today's focus is going to be on the Lesser Antilles, U.S. British Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, the Bahamas, and then we'll kind of dive into a little bit of what could maybe happen for us here in the mainland U.S. But the primary focal point for today's briefing is going to be the threat-based scenarios we have in place for the islands out there in the Caribbean, the Turks and Caicos, and the Bahamas. So with that being said, here it is. This is Disturbance 1, 30% chance of formation. We're at an over 30 split. This came out at 2 o'clock in the morning as we were all sleeping. I was not sleeping. I woke up to look at the models, and I woke up to that and those 0Z updates, and that's why we're also going live this morning, because there are ominous signs for our friends out there in the Caribbean, in the Bahamas, that we need to be paying attention to, and perhaps the eastern seaboard of the United States. A little too far out to tell in terms of the United States threats. I'm not really concerned for us right now, so if you have those questions, please hold off, or perhaps join us for a future live stream, because right now, we're really not going to be speculating the United States. We have imminent threats that are almost guaranteed for our Caribbean friends out there. So I want to make sure we get all the information out there for our island nations before we start dabbling into what could happen over a week from now. That's how far out we still are, but confidence is going to go up. And I'm grateful that National Hurricane Center is truly on the ball with this. We are not going to see this level out at a 30% chance of development over the next 7 days throughout the day today. I will move my head for you guys so you can see the text box down there. An area of low pressure could form in the central or western tropical Atlantic early next week. Some development of this system is possible while it approaches. Blah, say blah, blah, blah. I wouldn't even say possible. It's more or less likely at this point. Our European ensembles, we have nearly 90 to 100% of the ensembles from the Euro, just about 70 to 80% of the ensembles from the GFS, the Icon, the Canadian, you name it. All of our models are screaming at us that this will be a tropical cyclone, and a fairly robust one. This looks to really ramp up our ACE values as we get into the middle portions of August. So that infamous C, or not C, but that infamous H active terminology is going to continue to go up, and I don't think we're only going to level off at 30% through the day today. This is where our general area is right now for formation, but this is more or less the track that I would anticipate this feature is going to take. We are at that infamous crossroads of at about 70 degrees west longitude. We're faced with a huge fork in the road. Some models take it up towards becoming an issue for Bermuda as we get through middle August. Others want to arc it back in between Bermuda, the infamous slot between Bermuda and Cape Hatteras. Others actually want to take it as far south as Florida. These are the outlier bunches, to tell you the truth. I truthfully do believe that this trough is going to dig in. We're going to have that protective barrier, and if anything, the amplitude of the trough is more than likely going to keep the southeast safe, but the mid-Atlantic, particularly North Carolina, Virginia, all the way up to Atlantic Canada, needs to watch this one. I'm not too concerned for us down here in Florida unless this thing just takes its sweet time to get going, or we see an enormous fluctuation in our models. A lot of this is going to come down to real-time analysis, so it is way too far out to make a determination of if it's going to be a southeast threat, if it's going to be a mid-Atlantic threat, if it's going to be a northeast threat. We can't box ourselves in to such a mesoscale area. I'm going to leave it open on the table to where the eastern United States needs to be paying close attention, but we need to focus on our Lesser Antilles. So with that being said, let's continue to move on so we don't get hung up on our National Hurricane Center homepage. This is a look at our Goes East satellite shot. You can see the full disc shot here. Debby, not going anywhere. Debby is still there over the Carolinas. At this point, she's becoming a nuance, more of a frustration at this point, dorking up the pattern, causing chaos for the mid-Atlantic, the Carolinas into Virginia, West Virginia now. We're seeing some of that heavier rainfall extending into the likes of Maryland, Delaware, Pennsylvania. It is going to continue moving up the eastern seaboard. If you look over yonder, though, over the Central Plains, where it looked like a bit of an MCC feature ignited overnight over parts of Kansas, Nebraska, this is our next feature that is going to pick this feature up. Debby, the remnants of Debby, will probably be undergoing post-tropical genesis at this point, or that post-cyclone, that post-tropical cyclone transition as this next baroclinic feature moves in out of the Central Plains, picks it up, and can finally move it on out with the rest of our polar front jet. All eyes are now moving towards the Cape Verde, the West Africa, the greater Atlantic basin for what's to come next. And you can see, even just in this satellite shot here, we still have a very good looking Atlantic high pressure, void of any significant cyclonic or any kind of any kind of cloud cover or convection period, which is why all of our models are in agreement that pretty much every single threat for the rest of the month is going to make a run towards the Lesser Antilles. We could see it jog towards the north if these things rapidly intensify in the Atlantic basin before trying to cross into the eastern Caribbean, or unfortunately, we're going to have a lot of close shaves like we saw with Tammy, Philippe, Lee, Franklin, etc. last year. That's just the way the cookie crumbles. Looking at our true color visible satellite shot, or I should say just our traditional visible satellite shot, you can see all through here there is nothing but high pressure. We have nothing but open cell and closed cell cumulus. The closed cell cumulus would indicate the presence of our African easterly jet, and I have a really wonderful overlay I want to show you guys on cyclonic weather immediately after this chart that paints the picture perfectly as to why we are most definitely, I don't want to hear it. This is David coming out, not forecaster, professional David. This is David coming out. I don't want to hear it, bust. Don't want to hear it. No, it's very cut and dried at this point. You don't even have to look at the model data. We are going to get active for the rest of August, period. Period, point blank, crystal clear. Here is a look at cyclonic weather, and this is precisely why. So if you look up across the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, etc., we have very, very, very potent upper-level anticyclonic motion, particularly over the Middle East, extending into the Indian regions, the Indian Peninsula, and across Africa. If you notice, this anticyclone out here would indicate that our Saharan heat low, responsible for those Saharan air outbreaks that we saw through the month of July, has retrograded to its northeastern phase. And if you guys have been paying attention to this channel, I remember telling you that the Saharan heat low is critical in terms of how much Saharan dust we're going to get out there. There's piece number one. I'm still seeing folks asking questions about the Saharan air layer. Not going to be a factor. At this point in time, we're to the point, climatologically speaking, regardless of what energy, MJO, moisture, etc. is on the table, Saharan dust is going to start downward trending very quickly. We're on to August 8th. Typically, historically speaking, and statistically speaking, through periods of observation over the last 50, 60, 70 years, the Saharan dust trends off and dissipates fairly heavily as we get closer to August 15th and the rest of the hurricane season. You can see that transition has already started to take place with the relocation of our anticyclone, which would indicate that our hottest temperatures, our thermal lows, our thermally induced lows, have now pushed closer to the Middle East as opposed to Northwest Africa. And then it goes without saying, you can see it 1,000 miles away. Literally, this is our easterly jet right there. This is our subtropical easterly jet, our African easterly jet, as we like to identify. And look at these tropical waves that are cranking. They are enormous in size. For my fans out there of Independence Day, that's kind of the vibe that I'm getting here. We have one enormous wave and blob of moisture getting ready to make its fateful exit off the West African coast. Just upstream, we have another large MCS positioned over the heart of northern Africa, the northern half side of Africa, moving off towards the west at about the same pace, about 15 to 18 miles an hour, picked up by our easterly jet. And if you look over here, This is very interesting. I love the fact that we can see what's happening here. So we have a mountain chain that runs north to south over eastern Africa here. And if you look right where I have my ink drawn, there's nothing on the windward side of the mountains, but on the lee side, look at all this moisture that's just getting amped up and pushed off towards the west. This is what helps to develop the African easterly waves. They start out as lee of the mountain cyclogenesis or lee side genesis, lee side development, as our vorticity and our upper level energy crash into that mountain chain that's perpendicular to the wind flow at the mid to upper levels of the atmosphere, high up in the air. It crosses the mountainous terrain, causes it to shrink, and as it comes down the opposite end, the leeward side of the mountain, as it descends, it starts to really ignite. It really helps to develop. It creates that warming as it descends the atmosphere, and we get those robust orographically induced thunderstorms and moisture plumes. So we're going to have what we're seeing here right now is already the development of our next tropical wave. It's kind of cool. You can kind of see it like a conveyor belt in a factory, if you will, a tropical factory. We have one wave here, and we're watching the development, the initial stages of what will become an African easterly wave over Africa, developing over the mountain chain here. I need to do some research. I am very not familiar with the geography of Africa, but I would imagine this is probably a fairly well-known or reputable mountain chain, etc. So, and then obviously across the Indian Ocean and over the Indian Peninsula, look at the monsoon season going crazy out here. This also has teleconnections and implications for our tropical Atlantic basin. Look at all the moisture that's being supplied to our African easterly jet as it cranks across the Indian Ocean into Africa and then into our Atlantic basin. This is precisely why we are going to be entering an excited phase of the tropical Atlantic. And when I say excited, I don't mean like, woo, we're celebrating. I mean excited as in we're going to go from 0 to 100 very quickly. It was like pulling teeth up to this point to get our models to start indicating anything worth tropical mentioning out there in the Atlantic, for the Caribbean, for the Gulf of Mexico. From here on out, for the rest of the month of August, I would guarantee at this point, our models are going to be pumping out what almost looks like outlandish results. We're going to see wave after wave after wave, cyclone after cyclone after cyclone. We're already starting to see it. All of our models, the GFS, the Canadian, the Euro, the Icon, I'll show you at the end of the brief. That's because our MJO is finally coming out of its suppressed phase and strengthening. If you look at our spaghetti plots here from the GEFS brought to us by CPC, this circle here would indicate the kind of neutral point of our MJO, the Madden-Julian oscillation. And as we transition through our most favorable phases, 1, 2, 3, and 4, typically favor the Atlantic for tropical development. And if you look at most of our spaghetti plots here, we are going into a fairly excited phase of our MJO as it propagates from the Western Hemisphere through to the Indian Ocean and then eventually reaches the maritime continents towards the very tail end of this run. So the month of August is going to be busy. Because remember, we don't want the MJO parked right over top of us. It does help, but believe it or not, you want it just downstream of where you're looking to develop any kind of tropical activity. The reason being is if you have immense vertical velocities, as indicated here with an excited MJO, you're almost going to have too much vorticity and too much in the way of vertical motion to support the fragile state of developing tropical cyclones. And as a result, it's actually going to work against us. It'll increase our wind shear. It'll increase the conditions that are typically detrimental to seeing these waves develop. So if we're already getting into a favorable setup now as we rock through to the end of August, looking at the timestamp up here, the entire month of August towards peak hurricane season is going to be lighting up. We're going to have AOI after AOI after AOI. And this is another look at the vertical, or not, I should say not the vertical, but this is going to be your global perspective. This is our CFS weeklies. What immediately jumps out at me is look at Africa, look over India. We have an enormous amount of our MJO energy here, our propagating wave activity that helps to stir the environment and create a more favorable setup at every level of the environments, from down at the surface all the way up. Alex Roblox, I'm going to mention to you right now, no caps, no shouting. I know it's through chat, but I really don't appreciate it. I'm not ignoring. I will get back to it. But at the same time, I want to get all this information out before I get scatterbrained, and I would really sincerely and politely appreciate it if you do not hit caps lock and start shouting at me. Period. That's for certain. I don't think anybody in a professional environment would like that. Thank you. So as we move through time, you can see, I actually hadn't looked at this in that. I looked at the GFS and I looked at the Euro. I did not look at the CFS, but that is a massive standing weight. Good Lord. Wow. Okay. I kind of wish I had looked at this before getting on the live stream, so I'm not as taken aback as I am right now. For the sake of folks who may think it's an act or a facade, I did not look at this before starting this briefing, but that is an immense area of excited Madden Julian energy right there. That is our standing wave over Africa and a rather robust Indian Ocean monsoon. So yeah, it goes without saying that this is going to be a very robust next 3 weeks of August. Without a doubt. Without a doubt. We are now in a closed off phase. We will likely see the Pacific area, the Pacific AOR start to trend downward. And then the Atlantic is going to get going. And look at all this easterly flow. I know it might be difficult for you guys to see. I will zoom in here so this way you can get a better look. Forgive me if it looks weird. I'm adjusting the overlay so you can see. I will put it back to normal size after we're done. I just want to make sure that I'm communicating the info as best as I can. This is a trademark Atlantic setup. Trademark Atlantic setup. This is incredible, to tell you the truth. I have not seen this real time, so we're definitely going to have to keep our eyes peeled for a rapid uptick in our level of named storms. We were worried about the dead zone between Beryl and then Debby. It looks like we're going to be paid back in dividends at this point, because if you look at this dark, immense shading of green here, we have an extremely favorable environment across Africa to really get these African easterly waves, the tropical waves, blossoming before they make it into the Atlantic. And then what I'm looking at here are these wind barbs, these arrows. These arrows tell me that we have wonderful difluence aloft and easterly wind flow in the upper level, or the uppermost quadrant of the atmosphere, that's going to push these things in an easterly or westerly fashion, across our Atlantic basin and really get things pumping. Honestly, I hadn't looked at that before just now. I kind of wish I did. I don't like coming on the live streams and showing you guys genuine reactions, because I know some people will think it's cringe, some people will think it's not genuine. That was a genuine reaction. This is a very robust, I don't even know how to describe it. I'm running out of adjectives at this point to communicate to you guys how favorable of the atmosphere we have in front of us here going forward. Let me shrink the page back down so we can keep rolling through. This is going to be our European model. Same song and dance. If you look across Africa and across the Indian Ocean through to the end of August, extremely favorable, very robust MJO. We are in a very excited phase. Same thing with the GFS. The GFS is finally on our side again. It is awake and it has woken up and smelled the coffee, that's for sure. And we're seeing the exact same setup all the way through to August 20th into the very beginning of, well, not to the very beginning, but just about the very beginning of September. Very, very, very favorable environment. We might see a bit of a shutdown in the beginning of September before things kick back off again. Typically, when we have very pronounced MJO oscillations like this, or Madden-Julian oscillations like this, essentially what this does is it tells us that it's not only going to support a lot more robust moisture, robust vertical motions. That's the thing, is the MJO in of itself does not create tropical cyclones. What the MJO does is it stirs the mixing pot of our atmosphere and simply provides us with greater lift. It churns the atmosphere, if you will, kind of like you're mixing butter or you're baking a cake and you put it inside the batter bin and you watch the machine do this. It helps to reintroduce moisture, reintroduce instability, reintroduce warm air down in the lowest levels of the atmosphere through our precipitating patterns that move along. The MJO is essentially just convection, just thunderstorm activity that moves east to west across the globe. So with an excited MJO, not only can we guarantee we're going to have plenty of moisture out there for all intents and purposes, but at the same time, it's going to be moving. It's going to continue to move. It's usually when we go into a suppressed phase where we hardly see any green shades at all that it'll either typically reset itself, disappear, or it'll take forever to move out of its current phase. In this case, being as excited as it is, you can see on all of our models, this thing is propagating and it is moving. So it will only be a matter of time to where we get into the sinking side of it. We may see wind shear come back. We may see a little bit of things going on in terms of dry air being an issue, subsidence aloft, stability versus instability for tropical convection, but it'll come right back around. And if we go back to the CFS, we didn't go to the end of the run. Yeah, look at that propagation. That propagation is very good. We're going to very quickly see that standing wave move off towards the east, set itself up over the Maritimes, and then Kelvin waves are going to get spit back towards us. You can't see the timestamps here, but this is as we get into the first week of September, and even then, we're still going to have a fairly optimized environment. Not as much as what we're going to have right now, but here very soon. This is a look at our overnight European ensembles. Let me go ahead and move the picture over just a little bit, and I'll bring it down ever so slightly so we can see. The reason I'm doing the side-by-side perspective once again is to show you guys where our 0Z model thinking is in comparison to 12Z yesterday. So as you can see, the European model of all models is continuing to adjust a little bit more towards the left. If I were to draw you guys the mode and median of our ensemble products yesterday, our mode and median, which means the most frequently occurring outcome and the average outcome, was here. If you look at 0Z, not only do we have pretty much all of our ensemble members mentioning that this feature is going to develop, we've seen the mode spread out pretty dramatically. We now have a swath that cuts this feature due north towards Bermuda and a swath that comes right across the state of Florida. We don't want to see this because it's a big struggle forecasting down the road. But circling back to the whole intent of this briefing, if you look, our Lesser Antilles, our Greater Antilles, Turks and Caicos, and our Bahamas are more likely to see pretty much everything this feature has to offer before we come to that fork in the road. Been saying it all hurricane season. Call me out for it. It's verifying, so you can't say I'm lying. Lesser Antilles front lines. Puerto Rico, I see Elba in the chat. Miss Elba in the chat, thank you very much for joining us. It's very wonderful to see you in the chat. Kevin Rivera, I'm watching for you guys out there in Puerto Rico. This is going to be a problem. It is definitely going to be a problem, and we're watching very closely for sure. Watching extremely closely. Done. I'm sorry. Got to be my own moderator because we just don't have moderators in the chat this morning. I'm sick and tired of this. Sick and tired. That's all I'm going to say. This is going to be our 0Z control member of the GEFS. Now, I'm going back to my roots, and I'm focusing primarily on our 0 and 12Z models. Primarily because 6 and 18, they're not going to be too bad, but obviously, as we all know, the 18Z happy hour run of the GFS can be a little ridiculous, and then the 6Z is another continuity run. So with 0 and 12, especially since the Atlantic Basin is fairly data sparse, we don't have a lot of surface obs, we don't have nearly as many upper air observations as over the mainland United States, South America, Africa, etc., and that's why I want us to look more close at 0 and 12Z, because we're going to have that fresh observation data brought to us by the continental U.S., North America, all of our radio sondes that go up and down the weather balloons to provide the model data with a short-term update in comparison to what 12.0 prior had in store for us. So if you look at the 0Z control member of the GEFS, it is far more in line with what the European model is showing us today, as well as the control member of the European model. So that's kind of why I'm looking at this, because it shows that model-to-model and run-to-run consistency. And I'm not going to lie to you guys, that feature, Future Ernesto, comes a little too close for comfort off of our southeast coast. There's Ernesto right there. You can see that bona fide tropical storm / probably hurricane signature in the precipitable water values, and this is going to be very detrimental to the weather pattern across our island nations. Everybody's going to get a little bit of an influence from this. You can see it comes right through our Lesser Antilles, moves up towards Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands. Hispaniola does a number on it, potentially, the Turks and Caicos, and then right through the heart of our friends out there just off our east coast of the Bahamas, maybe taking a direct path through Nassau, their capital out there. And that's why I say this is a little too close for comfort. We've all been here before. If you're a Florida native, including myself, we've all been here before to where systems will come very close to Florida. Folks on the East Coast may panic a little bit. They may rush the stores, and then this feature just ends up bombing out off towards the east and then escaping out to sea or potentially becoming a mid-Atlantic coast issue. This is why forecasting for this, and especially looking at the upper air pattern over our continents, is going to be critical, because any nudge to the right, any nudge to the left is going to mean the entire world for everybody in the path of this system. That's all it takes. Let's say, for instance, I move the track over just to the right that much. This is maybe 1 to 2 degrees longitude. Notice that puts all of our Bahama friends and most of the Caribbean on the weak side of this system. Down, if I move it to the left, Sharon Tully, what don't you understand? I'm going to need somebody to moderate this. This is unacceptable. At this point, forgive me, I'm just going to have to ignore the chat, get it all out there before we derail the conversation. So, and I do sincerely apologize. There's just too much going on in the chat right now for me to look at you guys. I promise I'm not ignoring you. I'm going to go back up right now. Rashad Baptiste for the $2 donation. I sincerely appreciate it. Thank you very much, my friend. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And from here on out, I'm just going to... The United States is here. This is the United States. We're looking at the tropical Atlantic, so the North America is off towards the east. That's why I'm drawing it in right now. So, forgive me, guys. I'm not going to pay attention to the chat. We're just going to get through this. Just going to get through this for the sake of my own sanity and for the sake of you guys so we can get the information out there. We're looking at potential impacts as early as 13 August, 12 to 13 August for the Lesser Antilles. And then from there on in, this thing is just going to grind through our Greater Antilles before hopefully being pulled up into the Bahamas. I mean, I'm not saying hopeful for the Bahamas, but I mean just kind of hopeful that this feature does not end up crashing into the southeast or escaping into the Gulf with as primed of an environment as we have. Regardless, somebody is going to see the impact from this system, and it looks like the timetable for the Turks and Caicos and the Bahamas is going to be anywhere between the 16th of August, the 17th of August, and then there's the 18th of August before it possibly becomes an issue for the Carolinas after that. Then from here on out, if you look out over the Greater Atlantic, here comes the freight train. You can see right in through here. Here's 1 that looks to develop. Here's 2 that definitely develops this run. Here's 3 that develops. I forget what the G-named storm is. Is it Gustav? For some reason, Gustav stands out to me. Either that or I was looking at that earlier as a retired name. I'm not too sure. But either way, we have F, G, and then H. So we are possibly going to rapidly increase the number of named storms for this year. That is for certain. August is definitely going to produce. This is only the 24th of August, and we could possibly have our F, G, and H storm on the map before we round out the month with an extra couple 6-7 days as pocket change left over for the Atlantic to kind of do something with it. Here's a look at our GEFS ensembles from 6Z. Let me go back to 0Z. I'll show you guys the 0Z ensembles just to keep it fairly consistent. So here are our 0Z ensembles. You can see that the general thinking is an enormous fork in the road. Enormous fork in the road. Our stronger members naturally take this feature up and push it out to sea. Our latent developers or our more late to the party members take it off towards the west, becoming either an issue for Florida as the trough comes in or moving it into the Gulf. Right now, truthfully, what I think is going to happen more than likely is this outcome. I really do think this first wave is going to be pulled up and out. This is going to be our first fish storm of the season, just given our upper air pattern. Granted, we still have a long ways away before the feature can become close enough to feel the effects of our trough. This is our ensemble thinking as to when it will start to feel the influence of our Rossby wave, our long wave trough coming off the United States. That's when it'll feel the divergence out ahead of it. And that's where your corridor is of lower pressure to allow this system an escape route between our Atlantic high pressure and the trough digging down over the eastern United States, right in through here. I'll switch it right there. But this is 16 August. This is still 8 days away, give or take, 8 to 9 days. So we're really going to have to watch over the United States what happens over the next several days. These models have been very, very finicky with our steering currents across North America and into the northernmost Atlantic, so I would not solidify your plans just yet. The only unfortunate factor here is our islands are definitely going to see it. That's a guarantee. That's a guarantee, sad enough to say. We're definitely going to be tracking another feature coming through, and the main question on the board here is, how long will it take for this thing to really organize and develop? Will it be a little slow to the event? Will it be faster to the event? Will we have a developing tropical cyclone east of you guys headed in? Will we have a stagnant low-pressure center that begins to develop after it moves through the Greater Antilles? That's going to be the issue here. That's the primary issue here. We don't have any doubts at this point in the forecast track. It's going to be the intensity, and our models are slowly trending towards a more organized feature as we go over the next 5 to 7 days. So we need to be preparing now in the Lesser Antilles and the Greater Antilles for, at the minimum, tropical storm impacts. Period. Tropical storm impacts are on the way within the next 5 to 7 days. You have ample time right now to get everything together, get yourself prepared, come up with a backup plan if you haven't done so already, and just kind of hunker down and ride it out. From there, it becomes a lot more of a disparity as to whether or not this will be an issue for the Turks and Caicos before moving up towards Bermuda, or if us here on the eastern coastline of the United States need to pay attention to it. And then here's our second feature coming in, Lesser Antilles. I don't know how many more times I'm going to say it for the rest of the hurricane season. That's why I need you guys hitting that like button. I can't do it. I can't spam people with information. I can't copy and paste this information elsewhere. I refuse to do that because I'm not going to, quote, self-promote as other sources have accused me from in the back in the day. But I need those likes to go up. It's not a matter of money. In fact, I have things going on in the near distant future to where I will likely have to demonetize this channel anyways. So if you guys are thinking this is for money, for sponsors, for viz, no. This is because there are still other sources out there who are saying, we don't know where it's going. We do know where it's going, and we need to be confident enough in our forecast to tell you guys where it's going. Where the lack of confidence comes into play is for the United States. But we know very confidently that this is going to be an issue for the Caribbean, and we need to get you guys ready. And I know I have a lot of viewers who tune in from down there, and you need to be taking this serious. So we have about maybe 4 to 5 more days at a minimum before this system is knocking on your doorstep, and then it's a matter of time before it becomes a huge issue. Here's a look at the GFS PNA, or Pacific North American pattern. The reason I have this up is because, again, if we don't catch this first system, we're going to have a problem with the next system and the systems thereafter. You can see that the ensemble mean here goes from this very robust PNA pattern, a positive PNA here, into a negative as we pass by the August 11th, August 12th time frame. And what this essentially means is if we go back to our satellite imagery here, we go back to, let's see, what can I use here? What can I use to show you? Let's see. All right, I'm just going to use this. Now, we're going to go back to this chart here. Let's go ahead and say this is the United States, okay? There's Florida, there's the Northeast, there's the Great Lakes, and so on and so forth. With a positive PNA, we have a trough over the east and a big old ridge out over the west. Trough means safe zone. That means a storm will more than likely escape out to sea, unfortunately battering our Caribbean and our Bahamas more than likely, and maybe Bermuda as it moves off towards the right. But we are safe in a positive PNA. That's not a guarantee, but it's a very confident statement to make looking at the teleconnection here for North America. That's why I keep mentioning North America. I know we're looking at the Atlantic tropics, but the steering currents across the northern hemisphere will play a role in one way, shape, or form. Let's go ahead and draw our doodle one more time. Here goes the United States. There's Texas. There's the Gulf of Mexico, Florida. There's the Northeast, the Great Lakes, and the Canadian border. With a negative PNA, we have a ridge that builds in over the eastern United States with a bit more troughing out west. This is where it becomes an issue because, unfortunately, as we all know, ridging and high height centers in the atmosphere, they spin clockwise. So what that does is it prevents our systems from moving north, and they have to go in no other direction besides west. And you can see, at least according to the GFS, after this first system, we are dipping back down into a potentially negative PNA for the rest of August. If I switch over to the European ensembles, the EPs here, you can see more or less the same thing. We're going to come out of an excited phase of our PNA, not as robust here. This is the mean. We are still forecasting a fairly positive PNA, which is that trough pattern over the east, before we come down to a more zonal pattern, which means everybody is back on the game board. Zonal is not what you want either. We're going to go ahead and do our doodle one more time for you guys. There's Texas, there's Florida, the Northeast, Great Lakes, and so on and so forth. This is the United States. Zonal would mean that we don't really have anything. Zonal would mean our flow is more west to east across the United States. There's no protective trough. There's no ridge to drive it further west. So this opens everybody for a potential issue out of the tropics, on top of what our NAO and our general trade wind flow is doing out there across the Atlantic. Here's our 6Z GFS as we get ready to wrap up the live stream. There goes Debby, still doing its thing, getting ready to wrap up into a mature wave and finally go into its baroclinic phase, become an unstable parent low with fronts attached to it, and that's what's going to force us into that positive PNA pattern. Then, if you look down out over the Atlantic, here comes Ernesto. This has been cycling run to run. Very, very solid agreement, solid signal that we will get development somewhere either to the immediate east of the Lesser Antilles, if not just beyond that. Then it gets dicey. You may have a tropical storm moving into your general area at about the Tuesday, Wednesday time frame next week. Monday through Wednesday could be game time for you guys in the Lesser Antilles. So between now and the end of this upcoming weekend, kind of put that in your mind, rattle that around a little bit. It's Thursday, so we have Friday, Saturday, Sunday, full days ahead to make your plans and make your preparations, as well as the rest of the day today. Beyond that, rapidly intensifies. We're looking at a potential major hurricane as this thing moves in, according to the GFS, all the way down to 958 millibars as it transcends between Bermuda, between the Bahamas. This is a best-case scenario outcome for the rest of us. Unfortunately, the Lesser Antilles, parts of Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands are going to feel the effects of this system big time, and then it churns away up and out. And then take a look at that. There goes Francine hitting the game board, coming in. And unfortunately, this is a pattern that is a bit more CONUS susceptible. If you look at our pattern here, I'm going to go back a couple images. If you look at the pattern here, we have very weird ridging built in over the east coast and the southeast, spinning our winds like so. We have Atlantic ridging that's moving in out of the west and kind of spreading off towards the west into the central Atlantic. Here is Ernesto still marinating over the North Atlantic, and we have a deep trough that's further inland over the United States, unable to fully penetrate the east coast and escape into the West Atlantic. So this, alongside this, are the features that we need to be paying close attention to for the southeast United States and what's expected to go on as we go towards the back end of August. So again, my gut tells me that this first system is going to be a bit of a doozy for the Caribbean, maybe not so much for the mainland U.S., and then after that, we have a problem. We have to get right back to scrutinizing system by system and looking at our upper air pattern, because the more of these very, very strong tropical cyclones that come in and move north, the more our upper air pattern, the long wave pattern across much of the northern hemisphere is just going to get wonky. It's going to be a little bit distorted in comparison to what the jet really wants to do as it tries to reestablish balance. This is a pattern that you don't want to see if you want to avoid a Hurricane Andrew, a Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Rita 2.0, or put the east coast of Florida on the table. So before we go panicking, before we go freaking out, before you guys attack me and say I'm hyping up 384 hours, it's not what I'm doing, but I understand how the patterns work and I understand pattern recognition. And I will debate that with you all day, every day of the week until I'm blue in the face. And if you look, what happens here is our now parent low feature being Ernesto becomes a very amplified trough in the upper air pattern. We have this doozy of a trough moving over eastern Canada, so as a result, we're going to have a sharp amplitude ridge somewhere over the central and western Atlantic with a trough axis digging down over the central CONUS and more ridging off to the east of there. So these upstream features are going to be a problem. We just need to determine how much of a problem. We're still way a ways away, and the key takeaway here is development is coming, and we're just going to continue to see this development coming through. Now, we're looking at a bit of a zoomed-in perspective here on the European model, just so we can see what's going on up close and kind of get a determination of what the European model is thinking as far as intensity and track. This is 0Z. Here comes our feature right there. The Euro is a little bit delayed in terms of development, but a little bit faster than the GFS. If you look, this is going to be more of a Monday night into Tuesday morning issue for the Lesser Antilles. So the Euro is a little bit faster in terms of when it is expected to knock on your doorstep and push west through the island chain out there. From there, the European model of all models is very, very bullish in what is expected to occur. You can see a major hurricane working its way up towards the Cape Hatteras area, hopefully just going to scrape the coastline as a 965 millibar low. And then upstream of that, right there, we have our next feature. This could possibly be our F-named storm there, immediately after E, Ernesto. So this could be Francine just back behind this feature, moving in rapid succession, both of which coming way too close for comfort to a lot of our major populated areas, not only in the Caribbean and the Bahamas, but here in the southeast. So we have a lot to watch, a lot to worry about. Well, let me rephrase that. We have a lot to watch, a lot to be concerned about, but we're not worrying, we're not hitting the panic button just yet. We're definitely entering an active phase of the Atlantic, and this was as anticipated. And if you've been sleeping on the Atlantic, then, well, there's not too much we can do for you at this point outside of just now is the time to nail in your preparations for sure. What a shame what this chat has turned into. What a big shame. This is going to be a look at our 06Z icon on the left-hand side to show you just how much run-to-run consistency that we have. You can see the 0Z on the right-hand side. We are spot on. Models are definitely ready to rock and roll with Ernesto on the immediate horizon. This is early morning Tuesday, the 13th of August. And then if I continue on the right-hand side here, go to the back end of the loop, you can see Francine spinning up and then possibly our G storm right after that. Here is Ernesto, here is Francine, and then here comes the G storm immediately thereafter. So unfortunately, for a lot of us, peak season is just about here. Peak season is just about rocking in for all of us, and this is the point in time where updates are probably going to be rolling out on the daily, and we're going to have to really just nail down exactly how it is we want to pace ourselves through this, because we're going to be tracking multiple features at once, which means if you don't like these long-winded live streams or long-winded videos, they're only going to get longer so we can hit every single piece on the game board. But with that being said, we're going to go ahead and close out this live stream. Do we have any legitimate questions in the chat before I close up shop? I'm going to judge based off the first couple of questions that come through, and if they're not the most visually appealing, then unfortunately I will defer you to the comments section down below, and we'll talk at a later date and time. Please consider nudging that like button. The likes are a little lower, which is a shame. I do sincerely apologize to the viewers this morning. I'm not too sure what happened. I don't know why the trolls woke up and chose violence. I really don't know. It takes away from the viewing experience, and I'm sorry if I missed your question, a valid question in the chat. You guys can go ahead and call it like it is. You guys can call it however you want. You honestly, at the end of the day, if you really want me to be very, very stern about this information, I'm working and doing what I need to do. At the end of the day, if you choose to just watch this for entertainment purposes and not really care or do anything or take any action from it, then that's on you. And again, that doesn't come from me being mean, me being rude, I've been called, what's the word I'm looking for? A smart aleck. That's not me being a smart aleck. I'm genuinely just doing what I need to do, giving you the information, and from there, that's it. I'm hands off. I work hard day in and day out to look at this stuff. I collaborate, I discuss, I talk, and I put together my own information so I can brief it to you guys. And at that point, I'm basically leaving you holding the bag. So if you want to just watch it and turn it off as if it was your morning soap opera, then I guess that's that's on your part. But the writing is on the wall. The Proof is in the pudding, as they say, and this is it. We are now in full swing. We're headed towards the peak of the hurricane season. For a while there, we were tracking one individual entity, and even back then, that one entity was struggling in terms of, whatchamacallit, actually trying to get going. And then now we're looking at multiple entities at the same time on different model runs across the board, forming things up, so it's go time. It is definitely ready to rock and roll. Needs improvement? Not right now. No, not right now. I really don't think we're in a pattern susceptible to see anything escape into the Gulf unless it is very weak. If it is very weak, then it has the chance of missing all of our mid-latitude influence, being the troughs and the ridging that goes on over the United States, the northern Atlantic, and so on and so forth. And for those of you in the chat who are saying that I'm the one that's feisty, first of all, I don't feel like being shouted at digitally through the chat. And second of all, I have a lot of viewers who are tuned in right now. Some of them have already left, unfortunately, because of the unpleasant experience that the chat has brought them. So if you want to consider me feisty, then by all means, I'll add that to the list of the adjectives I've been described. But at the end of the day, I'm simply being stern and trying to make sure that I am not derailed from providing you guys with the information that you need for those who care about ingesting that information. And yeah, I guess you can say I'm a little feisty because I don't want people coming in here and derailing the content for you. At the end of the day, if you really want the reality of it, I'm going to turn the camera off and go about my day. It's you guys who may or may not get the information that you need. Roxanne, of course, the models are going to change. It's a matter of if the pattern changes. The models will always change. The models technically do always change. It's just a matter of being educated enough to understand what the changes mean. But every run, they're going to change. And when I say change, that could either be a dramatic shift, could be a new trend, could be a subtle adjustment, could be a tweak. And they're always changing. That's why I love to fall back on our 0 and 12Z runs, because they get that fresh observed data, that fresh upper air data to tweak their short-term forecast, which will have direct implications on the long range. So yeah, they're always going to change, but it depends on what kind of change you're looking for. If you think you hear the word change, and that means we're going to go from a trough to a ridge, or a ridge to a trough, that's not the type of change I'm talking about here. I think we are pretty locked in at this point that there will be troughing over the eastern U.S. Debby is going to be a culprit of that, and we are going to see things being slingshot towards the north, hopefully off towards the east before they can play a role in our weather here, but we'll have to see. What are the possibilities of a hurricane impact in the leewards? To tell you the truth, OTC, I'm concerned, to tell you the truth, because pre-Beryl, when the GFS nailed down the dynamics of Beryl, it was locked in and forecasted the rapid intensification just off towards your east before moving through the Windward Islands. So I have to give a small bit of merit to the GFS. Because of the fact that it did so well with Beryl, it did so well with Debby, it has definitely been doing a decent job for itself in comparison to last year. So I have to give it just a little bit of merit, just a little bit of clout, and it is concerning that the GFS and its associated ensembles are slowly trending towards a stronger system, as is the European model. The European model is also, as you just saw, trending towards a very strong system. So that could definitely be a relevant threat as we go over the next 5 to 6 days. And that's why I would recommend, friendly recommendation for our island friends down there, further towards the west, the Lesser Antilles into the British U.S. Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. I would say you need to start preparing for a tropical storm. Definitely to start preparing for a tropical storm. And then we have more thereafter, so that's going to be problematic. And yes, for those of you talking about, I said it at the beginning, said it at the very beginning of this live stream, that if you're in the United States, please refrain from asking questions. I mean, no, let me rephrase that. I'm sorry. Let me not shoot myself in the foot. Ask questions, absolutely, but don't go asking questions about the threat for this point, this point, this point, this point, because truthfully, the more imminent threat is going to be our Caribbean islands. That's for sure. And then from there on after, we have a very, very split decision as to whether or not it'll be an East Coast threat, a Southeast threat, or just an Atlantic Canada out to sea fish storm, Bermuda issue. Oh my gosh. Alrighty, guys, we're going to go ahead and wrap up the live stream, and we will see you again tomorrow, more than likely. I have familial plans tonight, and we'll reconvene tomorrow morning, if not tomorrow evening, if anything. And once again, I will say politely that our main area of focus is going to be the Lesser Antilles and the Caribbean. If you live in the United States and you're getting worried, you're getting freaked out, please do not get freaked out. Please don't worry. I've said it a bunch of different times that we need to focus on our Caribbean. The Lesser Antilles, the Greater Antilles, and the Bahamas. Critical thinker, I would hope that's not directed towards me. Because at the end of the day, if you guys see me getting riled up on the stream, obviously that's a no-no. I recognize that. I've gotten a lot of criticism for taking the time to address the people trying to come in here and cause chaos. I get it. I'm very well aware of it. But at the same time, I come on here because I'm passionate about this type of stuff. And I will openly admit I'm not trained enough to completely ignore the people who are trying to ruin it for everybody. Plus, I'm military, so I'm very used to one person spoiling it for everybody. Very used to that type of punishment and that type of influence on a population. So if you guys want to criticize and you know, whatchamacallit, okay. All right. Please consider clicking the subscribe button if you would take that into consideration, please. More than anything, let's nudge that like button. Let's get that information out to everybody. And if you have any additional questions, comments, or concerns, regardless of where you reside, we will go ahead and get back to you in the comment section down below, and we'll see you guys tomorrow for sure. Until next time, this is Weather Center Nazario.